Hi guys, sorry I'm outside again, but this week we were asked a few different questions. We were reading about the coming of age and sort of the transition of Ragged Dick to Dick Hunter. So first question is to kind of choose a novel. So my favorite book, my most favorite is actually Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. It's a true story about Christopher McCandless, aka Alexander Supertramp. He gives himself a name. Who he actually, I don't want to say runs away from home. So he graduated from Emory University, grew up in the suburbs of DC, and decided after graduation he was going to just live off the land for a few months and sort of just disconnect from society. So he sends all of his savings, $24,000 I believe, or around there, to Oxfam. So he sends all of his money, burns all of his cash, ditches his car, and hitchhikes from DC, or he somehow gets from DC, I haven't read the book in a while, DC to the West Coast, hitchhikes and just kind of bums and travels through Nevada and California, Montana. So a lot of this book is about, him reinventing himself and kind of searching for his own identity rather than the one that his parents gave him. So that's kind of where his alias, Alexander Supertramp, comes in. So he names himself that sort of as a way to reject his parents, as well as a way to kind of reinvent himself. He thinks he can do things on his own and doesn't need help from anybody. So throughout the book, you see a lot of people offering to help him. And he, decides, I don't need help, blah, blah, blah. So in the beginning of the novel, he sees himself as one way. He's kind of tired with the way things are and wants to travel to figure out who he really is. And through his travels, he learns a lot about the way of life, and that it's, you don't, just because you're a well-educated person and you're making all this money, that doesn't necessarily mean that's life for you. So, sort of before I connect this to the reading, he does this. So he starts out, he has no help from anybody, or kind of rejects help from everyone, has a lot of conversations with these people along the way, and then he winds up, and I'm sorry if you haven't read this or if I'm spoiling for you, but he ends up in Alaska. So he actually starves to death, unfortunately, but he leaves a lot of diaries, and I don't remember the exact points that he makes, but a lot of the points kind of show his changing perspective from this resentment towards society to he's finally learning away on his own. But then he realizes, you can receive help and you can ask for help and you can have support from all these people without living a traditional way of life. So my favorite line from the whole book, he, at the end of the book, he writes, one of his very last diaries is, happiness is only real when shared. And I think that's beautiful. I think that there's, beauty in being alone, but there's also, those connections you make with other people and the relationship that you have, that's where, you can really feel happy and share that happiness. So I'm going to kind of skip number 2 for right now, the loss of a parent, and just kind of connect this to the book. And I know it's not exactly sort of the same transition, because in Ragged Dick we see him becoming from a boy to a man, but I also think, Christopher McCandless, who sort of reinvented himself as Alexander Supertramp, is his version, even though he was already a man, is his version of this transformation from boyhood to manhood and figuring yourself out and seeing who you are and going through those struggles to, figure out kind of the person that you want to be. So, we see Ragged Dick, he's a lowly bootblack, and just sort of lives on the street, doesn't save his money, doesn't think that there's anything out there for him. We see him trying to do other professions, but he kind of comes back to this, and this was his most successful. So he seemingly, wants to stay with that. So we see him, excuse me, we see him as a bootblack, and then he meets Frank and Mr. Whitney, and they take a chance on him, and they try to push him. They try to get him to see that he has this potential that he doesn't see in himself. So throughout the day that Frank and Ragged Dick spend together, Frank will chime in and point out these areas, and he's like, you have the potential to do these things. I see this in you. And Dick's like, no, you can't see that. And he does. So he goes through and he keeps kind of, every once in a while, the book will reference points that Frank says to him, or things that Frank says to him that really shows that he is more, he can be more than he thinks that he can. So then the book goes on, they keep walking, and then you see instances, like where they find the $50, or the guy was swindled out of $50, they go, and he sees the guy, and he gets his $50 back, and he just brings it to him. There are those circumstances where that Dick has a lot more to him than he can even see himself. So then when it comes down to it, and Frank, I know we've read this and you know this, but just when Frank and Mr. Whitney leave him, the point that really stood out the most for me was when he's looking at himself in the mirror in the room that he had bought for himself, or rented for himself. He sees he feels these feelings of like he's ashamed and he's embarrassed, and you can finally tell that he's starting to kind of connect all these points that Frank and Mr. Whitney were trying to show him. So he starts to sort of see himself in a new light. And a kind of a metaphor I use for my journal, similarly to this, is that, throughout the book, Alger tries to show this reflection of your clothing as a reflection of yourself. So, like, what people see from your clothes is sort of like how they see you. And I think that Dick is starting to do that to himself. So he's starting to see, like, his old raggy clothes, and he's starting to say, that's not the life that I want for myself anymore. I like this new suit, and I want to figure out a way that I can wear this suit around all the time and not get it dirty, not have to shine shoes anymore. I want to wear it and wear it with pride and dignity. So I think both, the novel Into the Wild that I chose and Ragged Dick, at the end, we haven't gotten to the end of Ragged Dick, but I can only assume this is how it goes, is that, these two boys sort of, through their own self-reflection and own time alone to think and through solitude, they can really see who they want to be for themselves and who they're becoming, and then the last question, loss of a parent. So I haven't physically lost a parent, but I don't have a very good relationship with my dad. He's never really been around too much, so for me, that has definitely shaped me, because I didn't really have a father figure around. So that was really hard, because it's good to have a strong male presence in your life growing up, especially as a girl, because I wish I had someone there to show me sort of like how it should be treated and how to be respected in a kind of male dominated world like Susan. But even for young boys, I see my brothers, they grew up without a father figure, and it's been really hard because it's hard for my mom to connect with them. And I think in the sense of this book as well, it's not easy to raise yourself. It wasn't easy for my mom to raise 3 kids on her own. So for Dick to have to figure out who he is as a man and figure out who he wants to be without any guidance or support is really hard. So I think that's sort of where Frank and Mr. Whitney fit in as sort of replacements as a father. So does the loss of a parent kind of affect your development? Yes, I think so. Even if you haven't physically lost a parent, I think if you don't have that support and, a mature role model to say, this is a horror experience in life. This is sort of how life goes, and, these are ways that you can make it or break it. So yeah, I think loss of a parent and just not having one around is a huge factor in sort of how you develop, but it does, like we're seeing in Ragnarok, it's possible to become sort of the person you want to be even without a parent. But yeah, so that's all I have for today. I know, sorry, this is kind of a long video, but I really enjoyed this week's reading, and I think it's starting to become very clear. Alger, probably butchering his name, but it's very clear to see sort of his direction, and so how he's starting to develop Dick as his own person, rather than as like this facade or sort of as a judgment based on his clothes. So I'm really excited to kind of see how he develops and matures. So yeah, see you next week.